Welcome to today's episode of the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. Want to increase your financial IQ with today's discussion about an emergency fund. So if you're listening to this and you've listened to the show regularly over the years, you've heard me speak about this. If you're a client or a potential client and you had a meeting with me or someone on the team, we advocate for a 3 to 6 month emergency fund in most situations. There is some customization associated with this. Some people do or should have a greater emergency fund, but that's sort of the general rule. What I've never really gone into on the show is, when do you actually use the money? When do you decide how and when to take money out of the emergency fund? Let me be clear that there's not an exact right answer. At least in my philosophy, it's not very dogmatic. A lot of flexibility. But let's talk a little bit about it in terms of a guide to help you make a determination on when and if you should tap into an emergency fund. The first thing I would consider, is the expense or event unexpected? Classically, Dave Ramsey, the famous money get out of debt guru, uses the example, which I think is a great one, is Christmas is not unexpected. It happens every year. You shouldn't be tapping into your emergency fund to pay for Christmas gifts. I agree with that. Job loss on the other end of the spectrum is usually pretty unexpected. And I wouldn't save money separate from an emergency fund in case you lose your job. Generally wouldn't do that. Job loss usually is an expense or an event that is unexpected. Home repair, a tree falls on your roof, unexpected. Vacation is usually not unexpected. Usually you're planning a vacation and should work into your budget how to pay for said vacation. Car accident, that's usually unexpected. It should be, right? You might have to pay for your deductible or rent a car. Although usually you don't have to pay this stuff like the day of the accident, but that would be a good example of tapping into an emergency fund, the covered deductible, maybe a rental car, maybe even have to pay the repair shop until you get reimbursed by insurance. Where it gets a little trickier is something like new tires. So new tires, you can expect that you're going to need new tires at some point. When, you don't know. Right now, you could get a nail in your tire and unexpectedly have to buy a new tire. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about normal wear and tear. In my view, it's a little bit of a close call, but if you have to buy tires, probably tap into your emergency fund, or plan out of cash flow to do it over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Don't think it's a big deal. Again, I'm not going to get too dogmatic and strict about the definition, but these are some considerations. That's the first thing. The second thing is the expense necessary. Upgrading to a new cell phone might seem like an emergency because a new iPhone came out, but that's a want, not a need. I think generally speaking, that would not be something to tap into an emergency fund for. Repairing a car probably is necessary, but here's what gets a little tricky. If you get a dent in your car, but it's otherwise drivable, is it necessary right now to tap into the emergency fund? Or can you figure out over the next 1, 2, 3 months to get it fixed? Hey, I think it's a little bit of a judgment call. Hopefully you get the idea, the spirit of what I'm speaking about. And then the last thing, number 3, before I move on to some other elements, is the expense urgent. If a tree falls on your roof, as I said earlier, that's urgent. You don't want to wait to cash flow or wait for something to happen so that you can fix your roof. You want to fix the roof right away, likely even before insurance swings into action. So that's urgent. Going back to the car gets dented, is that urgent? Is it urgent to get fixed? I don't know. Again, a judgment call. But if the car has an issue where it's inoperable and you need it to get to work, well, then that makes it urgent. So those are the first 3 things I kind of wanted to share with you. Another element of this is how quickly can you replenish your emergency fund? And I think this is a factor. Let's say, for argument's sake, that your emergency fund fully funded is $50,000. Now, For some of you, it should be less. For some of you, it could be more, just using it as an example. $50,000, and you have kind of a close call item. Maybe it's like the new tires, or maybe it is a new cell phone that you could get earlier than someone else, or maybe you have a last minute deal to go away for the weekend and you weren't expecting it, but you could meet up with some friends. And let's say that expense is $1,000 out of $50,000, but you're saving $3,000 or $4,000 a month into your non-retirement accounts. I would take the money out of the emergency fund and then I would replace the $1,000 the next month. Not a big deal. I'm not going to stress over that. And in those examples, I might very well get the iPhone. I might very well go on the unexpected weekend away, simply because the scale of the $1,000 expense versus the $50,000 pot of money is not a big deal. If, though, you had a $10,000 emergency fund and your car gets dented and it'll cost, let's say, $7,500 to repair and you're paying out of pocket, whoa, I don't know if I would rush out to do that, because I wouldn't want the emergency fund to get cut down from $10,000 to $2,500. That would probably cause me to slow things down and figure out a different way working in cash flow. Related to this is exactly that, cash flow. How strong is your cash flow? If you have an emergency fund and you're looking to tap into it, but you're saving and investing a lot of money, sinking funds, non-retirement investments, college funds, 401ks, IRAs, maybe you have money set aside to buy a second home. If your cash flow is really strong, well, then that would make it easier and maybe even quicker for me to tap into the emergency fund, because I could just replenish it much quicker. If your overall strength is strong, if your overall financial strength is strong, meaning that you could quickly replenish, that's an indication your cash flow generally is pretty strong, then I wouldn't stress too much about tapping into the emergency fund, with the important caveat that you do replenish it. If it's $50,000 or $25,000 or $10,000 and you have to tap into it, it's very important at the earliest possible date that you replenish that emergency fund and get it back up to full strength. Now, I mentioned the term sinking fund for a moment. If you're saving for something, a first home, college fund, to start a business, a second home, those are commonly called sinking funds. They're money that you're setting aside for specific expected purpose later on. Usually it's going to be a big ticket item. You typically don't have a sinking fund so that you could buy, say, the iPhone. That might be a couple of $100s, although you could. Part of this consideration as you think about setting up your finances and coming up with a system and a rhythm that's good for you is, how many sinking funds do you really want to have? Do you want to have one for tires? Going back to my early example. So tires may cost, let's say, actually I just bought 4 new tires. I think it was $650, give or take. Do I want to set up a sinking fund for $650? Do I want to be putting $50 away over the next 12 months into a separate account so that when I might need the tires in about 12 months, that some or all the money is there? For me, at this stage of my life, at the level of wealth and financial security I am at, the answer is unequivocally no. That doesn't pass the hassle factor. That's too much work for too little gain. Now, for some of you, especially if you're weak financially, it may make a little more sense, but for most people, probably not. But let's look at a vacation. You're planning a cruise or some vacation next year, and let's say the cruise is going to cost $9,000. Then yes, might you do $750 a month over the next 12 months for the $9,000? Yes, I would do that, although it's a little bit of a dopey example because usually you'd have to pay for some elements of that vacation before you depart for the trip, so you'd have to work that out. What about home improvement things like a new air conditioning? That's a big ticket item. I think my daughter just got a new air conditioner. She did get a new air conditioner for a condo in the Philadelphia area. I think it cost about $10,000. So you may say my air conditioner has a number of years on it. I'm not sure when I'm going to need to replace it, but I'm going to need to replace it. Should I start setting some money aside into a sinking fund to do that? Yeah, you could do that. As I've said multiple times during this discussion, it's a little bit of a judgment call, how you want to play things. One simple way is if you think you have a homeowner's expense coming up, like an air conditioner or even a vacation, you could always bulk up your emergency fund and not have it in a separate account. So if it's $50,000 emergency fund and you expect that you're going to need a new AC, you could start bulking up, adding some money to your emergency fund, maybe to get it up to the $60,000 level. So when the new AC expense does arrive, you take the $10,000 out, it brings you back to your fully funded $50,000 amount. All this to say, there's lots of ways you can do this. I believe as a guide, you don't want to make your emergency fund a piggy bank where you're taking out money and putting it back in all the time. It should be relatively stable for most people most of the time. There's not a lot of money going in once it's fully funded, and not a lot of money, or frequently not money coming out of it. They should be rather rare events. Rare meaning maybe a couple of times a year. I haven't in the last 12 months even had one, but sometimes your luck runs out and you could have a string of these things. So I hope this provides a little bit of context and a guide for when you might want to tap into your emergency fund. Of course, if you're listening to this, nobody gets to decide but you. That's why this is a guide. I don't think there's necessarily a scientifically right answer. It's really how you want to play things. But I wanted to give you some additional insights into how to consider such a financial decision. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I look forward to being back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial podcast very soon. Have a great day.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of Osaic Wealth, Inc., and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of information provided at these websites. Nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues, or any consequences arising out of your access to or your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management Services, LLC, not affiliated with Osaic Wealth, Inc.